Greetings, friends. My name is Pavel, and now we will dive into the top news of this day. The 400 days of the war. Ukrainian resistance against an overwhelming but definitely not stronger enemy. Even 400 days ago, most experts in the world could not even imagine that there could be a long-term war of aggression in Europe in 21st century. Nowadays, this is an ordinary Ukrainian reality. Nowadays, it has become customary for the people of the world to call Ukrainians the bravest nation. Nowadays, it has become customary to look at Russians as savages and not people who have outstanding literature, architecture, theater, and ballet. Even more so, if even a year ago the Russian army was feared and didn't want to engage in a duel with the Russian bear, and now the only fear is only the red button of a nuclear bomb. What the Ukrainians were really convinced of, the Russians are fighting according to the principles of Peter the Great and Marshal Zhukov, to fight with numbers, not skills. Currently, on almost the entire front line, the Russians simply send their troops without ammunition to storm Ukrainian positions.
Ukraine has not wasted a single week during the full-scale war. We are constantly strengthening our state, our defense and security forces, our confidence in advancing towards victory.
During these 400 days of the war, the Russian army lost almost 173,000 soldiers only killed. If we consider that there are 3 times as many wounded, this is the standard ratio of losses in the NATO army, then this is almost 700,000 people. Once again, almost 1 million people, instead of embracing their relatives, developing the economy, or their own talents, lost their health or life in the war of aggression. To give you an idea of how much that is, there are fewer people living in the Washington District, Columbia.
There is a difference between Ukrainians and Russians. The Russians use meat grinder tactics. For them, their soldiers are just cannon fodder. The life of an individual soldier is dear to us, so we try to save it. Alexei Reznikov, Minister of Defense of Ukraine, in an interview with Bild.
Russian generals are now trying to find opportunities to resume offensive actions. The Russians are tempted to organize a massive strike, for example in the direction of Kyiv, reinforcing it with strikes from the territory of Belarus. According to the Russian command, this can be a decisive blow. When having strained the Russian army will be able to solve several tasks at once and actually complete the special military operation in one fell swoop. But this is not enough for the Kremlin. Putin needs a break. And for his own sake, he gets the impression he is ready for anything, even nuclear blackmail with missiles in Belarus. After all, the Blitzkrieg failed. The capture of Bakhmut failed. The war turned into a protracted meat grinder, and the Russian authorities, as before, are ready to grind tens of thousands of their soldiers in it. And you know, in addition to the fact that it is the 400th day of the war, we are now celebrating one anniversary of the withdrawal of Russian troops from the north of Ukraine. Indeed, in February and throughout the spring, Russia was able to occupy vast territories of Ukraine, but not for long. And I think the main reason was that no one could believe in a full-scale invasion. However, our soldiers have already managed to recapture half of the occupied territories. And we saw that happened under the Russian occupation. Looting, rape, torture, kidnapping, killing of civilians. And that is why it is now very important to free all the captured territories as soon as possible in order to prevent new crimes. The USA supports the creation of a special tribunal to bring to justice the crime of aggression against Ukraine and believes that institution will have broad international support. This belief was expressed at their briefing by the deputy advisor of the US State Department, Vedant Patel. According to him, the location in one of the European countries is ideal for the court.
We believe that the special tribunal should be rooted in Ukraine's domestic judicial system, as this will provide the clearest path to establishing a new tribunal and maximize our chance of achieving meaningful accountability. Vedant Patel, principal deputy spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State.
The representative of the U.S. Department of State emphasized that the U.S. supports all international efforts to investigate crimes in Ukraine, including those of the International Criminal Court, as well as the report of the UN Commission of Inquiry on Ukraine. Because all of Russia's atrocities we are witnessing in Ukraine today are the result of the crime of aggression. We must address the root cause rather than just the symptoms. On March the 17th, the International Criminal Court in The Hague issued an arrest warrant for Putin and Russia's Children's Rights Commissioner Lvova Belova over forcible transfer of Ukrainian children to Russia, being probably the world's largest child abduction operation in modern history. Such heinous crime also falls under the definition of genocide per the Genocide Convention. From now on, Vladimir Putin is an internationally recognized criminal and must be arrested as soon as crosses the border of one of the 123 countries that have ratified the Rome Statute. The ICC warrant for Putin is a turning point and an important step towards holding Russia and its leadership to account for their horrific crimes in Ukraine. We expect that the ICC will continue its important work in cooperation with the law enforcement agencies of Ukraine. The warrant does not replace the need to hold Vladimir Putin and the rest of Russia's top leadership accountable for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. Rather, it reinforces the need to do so. To this end, Ukraine gathered an international coalition, the core group of 33 countries, working on the establishment of a relevant special tribunal.
The day will come when a tribunal will be established to bring justice to our people, a tribunal that will punish this aggressor in the same way as the aggressors of the past were punished. The day will come when all the perpetrators of war crimes against Ukrainians will be brought to justice in the halls of the International Criminal Court and national courts. We will do all the legal work. We will mobilize all the partners that are necessary for this. This has already been done. Every day we bring justice closer to Ukraine.
Ukraine calls on all countries who respect international law and the UN Charter to join the coalition to put Russian leadership on trial for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. The European Commission plans to create a special intergovernmental body to strengthen control over compliance with sanctions against Russia. This is reported by Bloomberg with reference to sources in the European Commission. According to journalists, the project to strengthen sanctions control will start in June. It will aim to find and close the gaps in sanctions lists and improve coordination between European national governments. Within the framework of the project, it is planned to create structures that will be responsible for certain areas: freezing of assets, exchange of best practices, and improvement of compliance with sanctions measures. It is noted that 9 EU countries have already confirmed their participation in the initiative. Among them, the Czech Republic, Cyprus, Denmark, Hungary, Lithuania, Malta, Romania, Slovenia, and Spain. But what can't help but be happy, Europe is already working on new sanctions. For example, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania stated that Vilnius will ask to introduce additional sanctions against Russia and Belarus in the package currently being discussed in Brussels. This is a reaction to Putin's statement regarding the possible placement of tactical nuclear missiles in Belarus.
We see this as yet another attempt by two unpredictable dictatorial regimes to threaten their neighbors and the entire European continent. These are desperate moves by Putin and Lukashenko to create another wave of tension and destabilization in Europe. These actions are dragging Belarus further into the war with Ukraine and into confrontation with the democratic world. Belarus, which is increasingly losing its sovereignty, supports and aids Russian aggression and gets integrated more and more closely into Russia's military plans, is an additional risk factor for the Baltic region. Lithuania will discuss with its Euro-Atlantic partners how to respond to these militaristic plans of the Russian and Belarusian regimes. As part of the response, Lithuania will call for the adoption of new sanctions. Statement by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Lithuania on Russia's intention to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus.
Let me remind you that earlier, the Kremlin's intentions were also condemned by France. They called on Moscow to show responsibility and cancel the destabilizing decision. Following Russia's violation of the new reduction of Strategic Offensive Arms Treaty, this agreement is an additional element of undermining the international architecture of arms control and strategic stability in Europe, the country's foreign ministry said in a statement. The deployment of Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus would mean an irresponsible escalation and a threat to European security, and the European Union is ready to respond with further sanctions. This was stated by the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell. He added that Belarus can still stop it. It's their choice. Earlier, in response to the Kremlin statement, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine appealed to the countries of the Group of the Seven and the EU to warn the Belarusian authorities about the far-reaching consequences for Belarus if it agrees to accept tactical nuclear weapons from Russia on its territory. NATO called Moscow's nuclear rhetoric dangerous and irresponsible, but added that it has only seen any changes in Russia's nuclear posture that would force them to adjust our own. The White House said that they see no signs of the transfer of Russian nuclear weapons to Belarus yet. The US Department of Defense also stated that there are no signs that Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons. But Russia's nuclear danger is not only missiles. The Kremlin has been blackmailing the world for more than a year by seizing the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. After his second visit to the ZNPP during the occupation, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Raffaello Grossi, noted that military activity in the entire region is increasing. Therefore, the Zaporizhia NPP cannot be protected. Despite the work of the International Atomic Energy Agency experts, the situation at the station remains unstable.
It is clear that military activity is increasing throughout the region. Therefore, the station cannot be protected. Raffaele Grossi, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Russians captured 6 nuclear blocks, captured Ukrainians, people who work at the ZNPP, are in slavery. More than slavery, but slavery. After all, the Russians do not release specialists, force them to change their citizenship, forcibly take their children hostage and send them to the territory of the Russian Federation. Therefore, it is necessary to introduce new sanctions against Russia and Rosatom, whose representatives are trying to completely seize the NPP, because nuclear energy, although useful, is dangerous. That concludes our today's video. Thank you for staying with us and stay tuned for future videos. Goodbye.